Hey guys, welcome to episode 282 of Stand Up. Joining me today, my friend Bill B. in D.C. with always excellent political and historical analysis, and constitutional law professor Eric Segall. Two of your favorite regulars both join me today. Time to stand up with me right now. Hello and welcome to this daily podcast. Thank you very much for hitting play, for supporting me, for giving a 5-star review. Dan Leap with the latest 5-star review, and he emailed that to me. And these matter over on Apple Podcasts, so please post one there if you haven't. Dan wrote, if you want a show that's smart, nuanced, informative, and entertaining, you need to listen to this show. Pete's show consistently has the best guests with the most relative information of the day. You're really missing out if you don't give this show a listen. Dan, thank you. Everybody else, go post a review on Apple Podcasts. Okay, Thursday night, we've got a hang as we always do, 8 p.m. Hope to see you there. If you're a subscriber, you will get the link in the daily email, where you also get today's vitamin N, which is a picture of Leslie Noble's horse and, is it a golden retriever, Leslie? All covered in snow, which is the story of the Northeast. And Monday and Tuesday, 2 feet of snow. That's what I got outside the shed right now. Walking from the house to the shed, it was all the way up to my knees. I had to bring an extra pair of pants and socks to change into because it just kept getting all the boots wet. But what I do for you to make sure that this podcast is out every day for you to get the latest news and analysis from the smartest people I can find, and I know a whole lot of them, and generally 2 of them join me a day. So tell your friends. Love the snow. Enjoyed being out there on Monday. Hopefully you're enjoying it wherever you are, or the weather. Why am I talking about the weather? Let's get to the news. That's why you're here listening at the top. You can always skip ahead to the guests, but I always love sharing a few clips, few audio clips from the last 24, the news dump, and then we will get to my first guest, Bill B. in D.C. Last night, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had everybody talking about her emotional video where she recounted her experience during the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol and how she dealt with it, and then she told everybody that she was a survivor of sexual assault. Listen.
I'm a survivor of sexual assault, and I haven't told many people that in my life, but when we go through trauma compounds on each other.
It was over a 9.5 minute, rare, poignant, honest, transparent, emotional commentary from a congressperson. You can watch it on Instagram, but here is another clip.
This past week, Ted Cruz and now Representatives Chip Roy and, oh, by the way, some of the other representatives who actually encouraged people to threaten members of Congress or tweeted out the location of the speaker are now telling me to apologize for saying and speaking truth to what happened. These are the tactics of abusers, or rather, these are the tactics that abusers use. And so when I see this happen, how I feel and how I felt was not again. I'm not going to let this happen again. I'm not going to let it happen to me again. I'm not going to let it happen to the other people who've been victimized by this situation again. And I'm not going to let this happen to our country.
I highly recommend you go watch the whole 9.5 minutes. Very poignant, honest, and thought-provoking. And I'm so happy that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others are not allowing the insurrection of January 6th to be moved past. We have to investigate it and understand what happened. I'm happy to see the arrests continue to come in. And the big story, at least one of the big stories on Monday, was that apparently several of the people who were at the insurrection also actually didn't vote. They weren't voters in the election that they think was stolen. Here is CNN's investigative unit lead reporter Drew Griffin talking about his colleagues reporting on this story. Why weren't they the ones on CNN? Anyway, here's Drew Griffin.
My colleagues, Blake Ellis and Melanie Hicken, took a look at the 81st people, the first 80 people who were arrested at the Capitol, and their voting records, Brianna. And they found out that 10%, 8 of them, did not vote in the last election. You want to know who they were? Here's 3 of them right now. Donovan Crowell. He is the ex-Marine. He's affiliated with Oath Keepers. He registered for vote in 2013, but never voted, ever. In fact, the state of Ohio, the county, sent him a note asking for him to respond. They never responded, so he was actually removed from the voter rolls. This guy is charged in the detention of government property and conspiracy, destruction of government property and conspiracy. Jack Griffin is another one. He's 25 years old. He's from Tennessee. Charged with violent entry. He did not vote in 2020, even though on social media he was posting things like, "Why, God? Why have you forsaken us? Trump still has a plan." Part of that plan should have been that he voted for Trump, which he did not.
A little shade right there from CNN's Drew Griffin. All right, so now the big question is, what kind of aid package, rescue package, stimulus package will Congress pass? Joe Biden wants a $1.9 trillion bill. Republican senators who met with him apparently on Monday have been offering $600 billion. Apparently, that's not nearly enough. Well, the governor of West Virginia made news on CNN again Monday when he said that we need a lot of money. Major stimulus is needed, and gave, I think, some cover to Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who might be the one Democrat that could hold up big legislation like this and others. Anyway, here it is. West Virginia Governor Jim Justice saying, give us the money. Who cares? We need it.
Well, first and foremost, I wish we'd all come together, and that's just not blowing smoke. I mean, that's just because I don't do that. But the other flip side of it is this, Poppy, we've got a lot of people in West Virginia that are still struggling with paying their power bill because they got laid off because this pandemic just swept their job away from them.
Right, so which one is it? And
I mean, at the end of the day, really and truly, Poppy, what we need to do is we need to understand that trying to be per se fiscally responsible at this point in time with what we've got going on in this country, if we actually throw away some money right now, so what? We have really got to move and get people taken care of and get people back on balance. And I want to work with the Biden administration just like I worked with the Trump administration, and I want us to move forward.
West Virginia Governor Jim Justice saying, give us the money. That was a pretty significant comment yesterday and got a lot of attention, so I wanted to share that one with you. And now let's go to the White House, where President Joe Biden spokeswoman Jen Psaki held another press conference. I think she's doing these daily. And CBS's Ed O'Keefe asked her a question about, well, listen to this.
There are Democrats who see that the first meeting the president is having face-to-face with lawmakers is with Republicans and not Democrats. I guess why is the White House doing that?
Are there any specific Democrats you want to call out?
No, but it's been talked about. There's concern that
just people talking about it in hallways. Okay.
Sure.
Well, I can assure you that Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer, they have been in very close touch with the president directly and members of the senior team. He has been in touch, but also members of our senior team have been in touch with Democrats across the political spectrum, and that will continue. And there will be definitely Democrats who will be part of conversations here at the White House.
Jen Psaki not having any of the many people are saying crap, which used to come from the last people who were standing behind that podium. So I think that makes it even that much richer. That was great. Lazy. I love Ed O'Keefe, but that was definitely a lazy question, in my opinion. All right, I wanted to share some really good news here. Coming soon to a drugstore near you, the home rapid COVID test. Here is White House COVID Task Force Andy Slavitt.
I want to start with an exciting announcement. The Department of Defense and HHS made an announcement today at what will be the country's first over-the-counter at-home COVID test. The test is made by a company called Ellume, and it's on a testing platform that was developed in the NIH's RADx initiative. Now, these are over-the-counter, self-performed test kits that can detect COVID with roughly 95% accuracy within 15 minutes. After you take the swab, you put the sample into a digital analyzer, which will send a result to your smartphone in about 15 minutes. Making easier-to-use tests available to every American is a high priority with obvious benefits. Ellume has been ramping up manufacturing and will ship 100,000 test kits per month to the U.S. from February through July. That's good, but it's obviously not where we will need to be.
Home COVID test, baby. That is where we need to be, and that's good news. That's going to make a big difference, I think. I can't wait to test myself at home for COVID. It's going to be awesome. All right, that is the sound that I wanted to share with you from the last 24, and now I want to get to the news dump. More rapid-fire headlines, not COVID or politics-related, and probably, therefore, undercovered. Let's start with McDonald's Corporation, who Bloomberg is reporting has quietly begun selling the McPlant burger in Europe, Denmark, to be specific, also Sweden. And apparently it is has been developed with Beyond Meat Incorporated. It's from pea-based protein, rice protein, a secondary ingredient, apparently. Restaurants racing to add trendy plant-based items to attract customers who are concerned about the environment, animal welfare, and nutrition. While Burger King in the U.S. market has been selling the Impossible Whopper, which is made by Beyond Meat's main competitor, sales often taper off after the bump in demand from diners trying it for the first time. Well, we'll see if the McPlant burger is a big hit. I mean, I think if you slather anything with cheese, lettuce, tomato, pickles, onion, mayonnaise, mustard, and ketchup, it's pretty good. That's my opinion. What do I know? Let's head to St. Louis, where the St. Louis Zoo is planning to use land of its own rural area of Missouri as a habitat for a wolf breed on the verge of distinction. St. Louis Zoo planning to only about 20 American red wolves remain in the wild due mostly to illegal hunting, vehicle strikes, and habitat loss. And so this zoo is going to use 20 of the reserve's 355 acres set aside for 12 mating pairs of wolves, which will be brought in from other conservation organizations in 2022. The St. Louis Zoo has a long history in wolf conservation, and I definitely wanted to share that story with you. I love conservation and conservation issues and news. Head to the Vatican in Rome, where the Pope is denouncing the verbal, physical, psychological, and sexual violence that women endure and is demanding greater protections for them. That's right. The Pope denouncing violence against women and demanding they be protected. Pope Francis dedicated his February prayer intentions to female victims of violence and said those who commit such abuses are cowards. Prior to that, Francis also acknowledged the sexual abuse of nuns by priests, as well as the broader societal plague of femicide in Latin America. And then he continued to apologize for a history of horror that his institution that he leads has been continuing to carry out day after day. Okay, I made that last part up, sorry. I like this Pope, but come on, the institution is real rotten. All right, Nintendo profits are soaring because people are playing a lot of games during the pandemic. Nintendo company reported its profit for the first three fiscal quarters nearly doubled as people around the world stayed home for the pandemic and turned to playing games. Nintendo's still a thing? Yeah, of course. The Switch console apparently is a thing. My kids, we don't have games. We don't play really a lot of video games. We're not a house with games, so I never know what's hot and what's not. And the new Wheeze box is honoring the Olympian who stood in silent protest at the podium. Sales from this limited edition Breakfast of Champions will go to the NAACP, according to ABC News. Elite track and field athlete Tommy Smith set to become the newest face of the iconic Wheaties cereal box. Of course, Tommy Smith, a racial equality trailblazer and record-breaking track and field world champion, he'll be honored with a limited edition box that will debut in April. At just 24 years old, Tommy Smith was the top track and field athlete in the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City, where he won the gold medal in a 200-meter sprint, and he was the first man to break 20 seconds in 200-meter and cross the finish line triumphantly with his hands in the air. And he stood on that stage, standing on that podium, and he made a bold and culture-defining gesture when he raised his fist in silent protest for racial justice, solidarity, and human rights. That's ABC News reporting. And the snow count as I head to bed here on Monday, it's actually Tuesday at this point, almost 1 in the morning. Connecticut got like between 10 and 13 inches. Places in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, got almost 20 inches. Long Island got 14 inches. The Bronx, 15 inches. And where I live, there's about a foot of snow on the ground, and I love it. That is your news dump for Tuesday, Groundhog Day. Or is it Groundhog's Day? I think it's just Groundhog Day. I remember getting busted on the air for saying it wrong. Anyway, I really don't care about Groundhog Day. Sorry for not being fun. Okay, so let's get to my first guest, shall we? And thank you very much for joining me today. Remember, you can always skip the news segment if you don't want to hear the news to get to the first guest or the second guest. There are generally 3 big reasons to join me. You got the news updates and you got 2 guests, and I often will throw a little bonus nugget at the very end, so always a good reason to stay. And let's get to my first guest, shall we? Joining me, I always love my conversations. Coming up, by the way, Professor Eric Segall. We had a great conversation on Monday night about the Confederate flag and racism. Our continuing conversation from last week, which so many of you love so much. He wrote a great piece as a result of that, and we talked about that. That's coming up at first. Bill B in D.C., the future of the Republican Party, why we can't move past the insurrection, and why D.C. media frames negotiations so wrong so much of the time. Here's my conversation with parking garage small business owner in Washington, D.C. on Twitter at Bill B in D.C. It's Bill Boyle.
Mr. Dominic, how are you, buddy?
Yeah, Bill B in D.C., everybody coming at you. Coming at you live in the middle of a blizzard, everybody. How much snow did you get?
We only got like 3 or 4 inches, but it's never quite stopped. It's just kind of hung in there and hung in there and hung in there. So it's really been kind of snowing or misting for like 2 days.
This amount of snow is not uncommon for where I grew up, upstate New York.
Yeah.
But for where I live now, it is pretty only good. Maybe it happened this much once, but it's well over a foot in between 2 feet. I just walked out here to the shed after wolfing down some dinner to come talk to you, and from my knees down are soaked because they're covered in snow. I had to wear my muck boots, but I can't find them. You know, the kind that go all the way up to your knee from swamps.
Yeah, I've got some old rubber hunting boots. That's exactly what they're for. Yeah.
And but I couldn't find them. One time I need them. I don't know where the hell I put them.
Yeah, down in central Jersey, my brothers are telling me it's about 2 feet of snow. So that's real snow. That's no.
It's awesome. I love it. I love it. Love it.
I'm jealous. I mean, my kid, after 3 years old, I think, has never seen more than about 6 inches of snow at once. And he hasn't seen more than 2 inches in like 2 years. So it's I mean, we went sledding yesterday. It was fantastic, but we were like really making it work with like 3 inches of snow.
All right. So we go from the storm of the year to the storm in Washington, D.C., which I want to talk with you about. You've been very good on Twitter lately. Are you ready to rock? Are you ready to talk about it all? Are you ready to go? Just jump right in.
Yeah.
My first thing that I wanted to discuss with you is just getting kind of your reaction on how the media is handling the Biden administration, specifically as it relates to what is being called the COVID rescue bill negotiations, relief aid to American businesses, etc., because of what COVID has done to the economy. And what you're hearing in terms of the conversation on your morning shows and your Sunday shows on the networks, as well as, in my opinion, what you're hearing, the types of questions being asked to Jen Psaki, Joe Biden's spokeswoman, are all wrong. The whole conversation is wrong. Number one, we should still be talking about the Sedition Caucus and the insurrection, which took place just under a month ago. And number two, we shouldn't be talking about this unity that Joe Biden wants to find and the bipartisan negotiations on anything until Republicans admit that the big lie. And until those two things occur, then Washington reporters and pundits on TV should be leading with that framing. And that's probably the most I'll talk here, but I wanted to set it up and get your reaction to the way that media and the Washington, D.C. kind of press corps, not all of them, but many of them are handling this, framing this.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's not all of them, but of course, it's typically the ones that you would expect, a bunch of guys at Axios, Politico, The Hill, places like that. And it's really gross because what you're watching is the dynamic that gave Trump all of his oxygen in 2016 come into play here. For the press, Trump was really profitable. And it was tons of clicks and tons of page views and everything else every day because something fucked up and crazy was always happening every single day. And so what you're seeing right now is this, like, all these folks who said, why the fuck can't we have a serious president who doesn't embarrass us every day and does
call us enemy of the people?
Right. Well, right. Like they were saying that was awful. Let's get something new. But now you can see that they're like, it's like when you net a fish and throw it on a dock and it sits there gasping. That's how a lot of the journalists in, the White House and at these various organs are behaving. I mean, the classic for me was Politico. I kept the tweet up because I wanted to read it because it just struck me as so fucking wild. There's a Politico tweet, and it's, how serious is Biden about partisanship? We're about to find out. Today, 10 Senate Republicans will make a counteroffer to Biden's $1.9 trillion pandemic relief plan and meet with the president to discuss their idea. Now, let me parse that out a little bit. Biden put up a $1.9 trillion pandemic relief plan. That plan has a 65+% approval rating. Okay? Like 25% of the country is not that hot for it. 65% loves it. 10% doesn't know. That's big fucking numbers. And that is in support of $2,000 checks, by the way, not just a plan, but basically what Biden's offering. So what happens? 10 Republican senators who Biden does not need, right? He has the votes already.
He does?
He doesn't. I'll get to that in a second. Yeah, I'll explain why. But Biden doesn't need them. They offered him $600 million. They offered him less than a third.
He doesn't, but they requested the meeting Monday, just to be clear. He doesn't need him.
So they requested the meeting, right? But the fact is that, like, I'll explain why Biden doesn't need votes in a second, but doesn't need their votes. They offer him a third of what he was coming to the table with on something that is politically popular and popular in a bipartisan way. And yet, what Politico is saying is if he does not effectively come some distance to their point of view, he's the one who's not being bipartisan. The whole frame is set in the terms set by Senate Republicans. And it's a really fucking bizarre thing. I mean, it's media capture in this mindset. And I'll give you an example of how bipartisan this is. And this goes to how I know that Biden has the votes. Governor Justice of West Virginia, he makes Attila the Hun look like a cuck lib. Justice said, spend the money. The danger is not spending enough money. People are dying out here. It's awful.
Yeah, the governor of West Virginia, Jim Justice, he said, so what if some of it gets wasted? He just said, who cares? We'll figure it out later. Spend the money. Nothing. Yeah, go ahead.
And by the way, like, whatever that guy's other issues, of which I have many with him, he is 100% right about that. If you talk to economists in D.C., there's a guy named Stan Voiger, who's an economist at AEI that's a friend of mine, conservative, semi-conservative economist. He's told me that every single economist who does not have their head very firmly up their rear end, all they're worried about is that there won't be enough money spent. That you can't overspend at this moment. And so you have any conservative who is not just a complete hack, any economist that's not a complete hack, any politician that's not a complete hack knows we need to do this. It is the most bipartisan thing in the world to do this. It is popular. People want to do it. And yet 10 random senators on the other side of the question can just say, hey, whoa, hold on a second. We want to talk about it. And if that, and if Biden does not kiss their ass or doesn't agree with them, he's the one not being bipartisan.
It's this constant reset by a lot of folks in the Washington media, as well as just kind of corporate media in general, a constant reset where it doesn't matter what happened tomorrow. You're a Republican, you're a Democrat, you got to find a way to agree to compromise. It's stupid and it's insulting to anybody who's watched, because I'm old enough to remember the phrase, I'm old enough to remember being annoying, but I'm using it to say.
I resemble that remark.
To say that, remember the Recovery and Reinvestment Plan, commonly called the stimulus plan, that Barack Obama came into president with this economy in free fall. Economists said you need government stimulus to get things back on track. Republicans, of course, don't agree with, they don't understand economics, and they only want money for the wealthy. And so they said, listen, we'll vote if you'll compromise with us and give tax cuts as part of the stimulus package. So Obama and Democrats said, okay, a third of the almost $1 trillion of stimulus in 2009 will be tax cuts to compromise with Republicans. And you know what they got? One fucking Republican voted for that. One in the House. Nobody in the Senate. It barely passed. And so the point is, Washington media should remember that. That was before the insurrection, before Trump. Republicans negotiated compromise, then didn't vote for the thing. That, to me, is where you have to start with the framing of today's politics. You have to start there.
Yeah. I mean, that's right. And yet the media doesn't do it, or large chunks of the media doesn't do it. And I think we have to wonder why they don't. And I think there's a lot going on, and like how the New York Times could be one of the greatest newspapers in the history of all newspapers, and still is. And yet, had that op-ed about how Biden really needs to slow down on doing all these executive orders. The vast majority of which, by the way, were executive orders to stop things that Trump did, like putting kids in cages or throwing dreamers out of the country, or fixing the fact that we promised all these folks that if they served in Afghanistan for us, they could become American citizens. And Trump took that away. Dreamers.
Right? Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a good one.
Biden is reversing all of these evil, un-American, like things that are totally against our whole civic culture and unproductive. And the New York Times, do they say, well, he's doing a lot of that, but we get it? No, they say, whoa. Hold on a second. You're doing these executive orders. That's not good. And in that article, by the way, they don't even address the fact that the reason presidents do executive orders is that we have a problem in the Senate, that they use the filibuster to make it impossible for the governing party to do anything. And so because of that, presidents use executive orders. So they just totally avoid the filibuster question or other things that add to that, like gerrymandering, or that, DC's not a state, et cetera. And they fall back into this shit. Like, did they like it when Trump did a lot of executive orders? No. Did they treat it with the same sort of cool disdain they're giving Biden about it? Not at all. And I think all of this gets back to, they need conflict no matter what. They need conflict, and they need to report the man biting the dog. And if the man isn't biting the dog, they're going to say he is.
Which just, I don't want to get lazy with this criticism that you're making, which is 100% accurate. But the thing is, it's changing, Bill. It's changing. The corporate media stuff, they need this kind of conflict, and lazy hosts and media producers and writers and journalists need something like this to hook onto to get clicks. But there are because they need millions of people to be watching, to pay their bills, to make profits. But there are so many of us now in kind of independent media and smaller media outlets who have a better moral clarity and can succeed with 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, paying subscribers, and not have to bullshit the people who are listening to us to create this more interesting conversation. And we can have what you and I are having, what I'm trying to do each and every day. So I think that's changing. And I think that that's super important. But it's still true that the access to Jen Psaki, to Joe Biden, is still granted to many of the mainstream media outlets, New York Times, CNN, Axios, Fox News, the networks, etc., which is fine, but they still have to exist in the paradigm that you're describing to make money, and it's old and it's dying, and that's why so many of the rest of us are shitting on it.
If you think about it this way, though, there are two different medias now. There is the folks who are on Substack or on Patreon or pick your platform, right? Most of those folks who are independents are not doing a lot of investigative journalism
or original reporting, right?
Or original reporting, because they don't have the money. So they're mostly analysis, right? I mean, David K.
commentators, pundits, analysis would be would be generous,
right. And David K. Johnson is trying to change that, but he has, he can basically do one investigation at a time because that's all the money he can get together. So I think what's happening, which is interesting, is back in the day, the punditry used to be sort of the acme of the traditional journalist. You ended up with like Sam Nunn on TV every Sunday morning, pontificating on what was going on. Now what's really interesting is that those reporters who are in that world, they don't often end up in those pundit spots. You end up with like Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi and God forbid someday Jimmy Dore, at least on the right side. And on the left side, Van Jones, for instance, you know how my feelings about him, but obviously he's competent at what he does, even if I don't agree with it. But he didn't come up through the investigative journalist path. He is now on CNN because he's a personality. Right. And that is true of a lot of folks where, you in the old days, like somebody that was up there really had intensely good investigative journalistic chops. Now, if you look at a CNN panel, which I think is not terrible all the time, but if you look at these panels on CNN or MSNBC, which most of those people didn't start out as journalists, right?
I mean, I don't know. Probably not.
I mean, it was this way. Back in the day, there were none who weren't journalists to start with. Now it's a mixture of politicians.
Well, the question of original reporting or original investigation and the rest of us just aggregating that and commenting on it leads to what? What is your criticism? Or
it's sorting. It's not even criticism, just a description. What's happening is there's like this sorting out process.
Yeah, but But that's why you have to have some baseline for what you trust in terms of reporting and in terms of the consensus around things like science, much less economic policy. And when you have a consensus on an economic policy, there's not really a controversy about the economic situation that we're in. It was caused by a goddamn virus, a pandemic where everything shut down. It's not about laziness. It's not about I took risk with my capital. It's not about tax policy. It's not about any of that. And we know what's
interesting is that the response to it, which is we need to spend money. I have heard and I've read publicly Republican politicians saying our argument that we have to have austerity is completely out the window. We just blew through the budget under Trump. There's no way we could even look in the mirror anymore and say that.
I disagree with that. What would ever stop them from being bold hypocrites? Yeah, but
but hold on. What's interesting is that, and this goes back to our original thing about how the media was talking about Biden and COVID and everything, and the COVID package. The people really are into Trump. They're reactionary populists. They don't give a shit about spending money. They're fine with spending money, right? The people who are like the sort of Bush era Republicans, any of them, David Frum, I think, is one of these people who they're like, look, we have no right anymore to talk about we can't, with a straight face, tell the Democrats not to spend money. And Democrats themselves obviously are okay with spending money for the right reasons to fix things. So it kind of gets back to that whole question of like Biden being bipartisan or not. There is not a single large interest group in Washington, D.C. anymore. And believe me, I talk to guys at places like the Chamber of Commerce, AEI, et cetera, who thinks getting the deficit higher is a really serious issue. Nobody thinks that.
And
so like and Politico knows this, right? I mean, they know this, and yet they still frame it the way they do. And it's just amazing. It's amazing to me. Not surprising, sadly, but amazing.
I saw this statistic today. Republicans passed a $2.3 trillion tax cut for super rich people and corporations under Trump. Now they say we can't afford the COVID rescue, the COVID relief under Biden after almost 500,000 Americans have died. It's you're right when you say they would be hypocrites to say a thing. They have no ground to stand on, but it's never stopped them. So it's not really a great argument. They don't have any principle at all, which leads us to what I think is still the most important question. You're in D.C. I'm sure it's still getting talked about a lot more in D.C. than it is around the country, but it should be the story every day, the lead story, the top of the hour news for any news should be COVID and the investigation into the insurrection and the latest, because there are so many developments and so much information. So I'm not seeing that again, so I'm criticizing media, but I'm asking you not about the media's coverage of it, but your thoughts on where we are at, what we have learned, and where we need to go with what happened on January 6th in your town.
Well, so the number one thing that has happened so far is that the Republicans in the Senate, not McConnell, by the way, he would have gone another direction if he could have gotten his caucus to back him up. But McConnell's caucus was so craven that they gave up the game on impeachment before we got within a mile of the court case or the case in the Senate. So Trump knows now that he can do whatever the hell he wants to, and he's not getting convicted for impeachment. And so Trump is already returning very quickly back to his old habits. And, Taylor Greene was going to visit him today or tomorrow. Trump is trying to get his lawyers to argue that there was election fraud in the Senate floor, which I will not be at all surprised if they say they're not going to do it up until the minute they do it on the floor. Lindsey Graham is talking about, if the Democrats bring witnesses, we're going to bring in the FBI, which is you know what that is, by the way. That's saying, we're going to bring Hunter Biden, right? Like, so, yeah, that's what that's about. So all of this is we're right back to square one with the Republicans. The Republicans have folded completely. McConnell is attacking Taylor Greene today, and I think that's just because he wants to attack somebody, and he has correctly figured out that they've got to burn the village down to save it, basically.
Well, by attacking, it's my understanding that he put out a statement, Mitch McConnell, and you keep calling her Taylor Greene. You're talking about Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course. Yeah. But go ahead, and I interrupted you there by saying that he put out a statement. So McConnell he puts out the statement about because he thinks what? Because you're actually leading me to my maybe final question for you about the future of the Republican Party.
Right. I'll go to that in a second. So McConnell knows that he wants to attack Trumpism because he knows how bad it's going to be in the long run. And I'll explain how bad I think that's going to get later. But he can't attack Trump because his own party is so afraid of Trump. So he's going for the low hanging fruit in hopes that he can, start with her and then maybe successfully destroy her and then go to the next and the next and the next. It's a forlorn hope because his party is fracturing in front of our eyes. And they're fracturing in front of our eyes because they don't really believe in anything anymore. They're worse yet, their base doesn't. And none of them have had the stones, or not enough of them have had the stones to stand up to that. And so what you have in D.C. right now, when it comes to the impeachment trial and the sedition and the insurrection and everything else, is that the institutional D.C., the FBI, CIA, the NSA, all those, well, not really the CIA, not much anyway, but all these groups are turning 20% of the firepower that they used to point at Al-Qaeda and Somalia and, Al-Quds or whatever, and they're pointing it all very directly at all of these white nationalists. And those people, the ones that were dumb enough to stick their heads up, are going to get hammered down harder than they ever could have expected. And so what you're going to see in Washington is that Trump is going to get off, but there's going to be a week of utterly compelling testimony, video, speechifying that shows how close we came to a hostage situation / murders in the legislature, in the Congress. And I think it's going to be a really bad thing for the GOP. And it's going to be a really bad thing for Trump. And the worst thing about it is they won't do what they need to do. And it will create bigger fractures in the GOP because you're going to have people like Kinzinger going, look, we have turned into the enemy, and we have to do something about that. And people are going to attack him. They're going to be even madder at Liz Cheney. They're going to be even madder at Kinzinger. All the Jim, the hardcore crazy Trump people are going to hate those people even more. And I think we're looking at a fracturing GOP that, they're just going to start losing races in places they easily won. Georgia was the thin edge of the wedge. And you're going to see white, educated moderates vote Democratic more and more and more and more. And that's the Reagan coalition leaving the GOP for the Democrats finally and forever.
Well, do you think that the analysis that you just gave on the future of the Republican Party, the fracturing of the Republican Party, is sound, really sound?
I think that it's, white nationalism in a country that is whatever percentage white is going to be a powerful force for a long time. But to be a majority party that can really hold on to power, they're going to be forced to take ever dumber, ever crazier, ever more majoritarian courses to maintain their power. And I just don't think that in the end, with our sort of core civic culture, I just don't think that works in the end.
But are you constantly clicking while you're talking to me?
No, I just did that one time.
Clicking sound. I always hear whenever we talk.
It might be my chair.
Whenever we talk, I hear it seems like you're constantly clicking an old school mouse.
I don't have an old school mouse.
Huh. So will you call that threat of white nationalism? Sure, absolutely. I'm the first guy to call it. But what do you call, and what does it mean to deny the Sandy Hook shooting, 9/11? Yeah, I can put that in. I can find a way to put race in almost everything I can. I've been accused of that, and I concede I can. I think it's there in everything. But are you saying that some of these views about the shootings, 9/11, and now I think more importantly and most interestingly and most urgently, COVID and vaccines, are you saying that those crazy conspiratorial views are going to alienate a certain segment of the kind of Republican core conservative, you call them Reagan coalition? Are you saying that that's going to happen in any in a way that actually the outcome matters? Because I worry that they all, or a huge percentage of them, just keep going down crazy street and living on crazy lane.
So here, to say white nationalism in the U.S. context is probably not as useful a term as it would be in, Russia or Germany or whatever. But maybe a better way to say it is reactionary politics, which is what this really is. It's, someone who is like, no, I love my guns so much that I don't care that a bunch of kids got killed in Sandy Hook. That's reaction. There's nothing ideological about that other than I want what I want, the way I want it, and the way things used to be are better than the way they're going to be. That's it.
Well, that's not necessarily a fair representation of their view. I mean, they don't not care. They just think that if everybody there had guns, it wouldn't have happened if only the teachers were armed.
Come on. You fired firearms. You know how to, if you know anything about a firearm, you know that if every teacher in that school had a pistol on them, 15 kids.
Yeah, but you can make the argument all day. Listen, you don't have to make the argument. I think it's crazy to think that these views that gun folks have about self-defense and so on. If only there was but I'm saying, go ahead with the point about.
See, that's a really good moment right there, because you just said to me effectively, "Oh, sure, you can make an argument, but they're never going to buy it." Right? In other words, like their rational analysis or dispute has no place in this. They're not interested.
That's what reactionary politics is. Say it in a different way. Define reactionary politics, because I think it's such an important point to make about the difference between folks on the right and folks on the left. However, increasingly folks on the left have become very reactionary with the views of people like Jimmy Dore and many others. So
I would argue he is no longer on the left. He's an extremist, just a flat out extremist. And honestly.
Yeah, there are some people. There are some people like you could throw Dave Rubin in this category where like
Dave Rubin's an extremist.
Yeah, but like it's just really is just about their brand and getting a tremendous amount of attention. Nothing about what they're talking about really matters to them. They're just trying to sell books and get clicks, and they have no skin in the game at all.
Yeah, their politics is entirely, though, reactionary or extremist politics. I mean, my favorite Dave Rubin, like the classic dumb conservative thing, he had a book called Burn This Book with like unlit matches on the cover. And that was like, think about it. He's like saying, oh, I'm being oppressed, but I'm encouraging you to burn my book. It's like kind of an amazing, it's I guess it's marketing that works on really stupid people, but it still just makes me want to like die laughing.
Sure.
It's a ridiculous thing.
Well,
but reactionary politics is it's emotive politics that are really almost politics as entertainment, almost politics as identity, and not necessarily racial identity. It could be politics of, what a real American is, which is what we have. There are
that's
people
racial
of color. What's that?
Real American. I mean, I thought you were going to say something like some issue like guns. I mean, it's not necessarily a real American is, of course, a white American. I mean, that's racial.
Well, I mean, but there's even people on there. Trump got some black votes this time around, and they're black people in the black community that
they're like 4, and they're asshole patriarchy.
Sure, but there's still some. It's not necessarily entirely racial. It's cultural, and it's your culture becomes your politics, and you see any change to that culture as a threatening event. And a lot of times, by the way, this is tied to you live in the socioeconomic class that is the most threatened by progress, right? And so you don't have the tools or the inclination to figure out rationally what's going on. If you did, by the way, you probably moved out of rural Ohio and moved to Cleveland and got to learned how to code, and you moved on. So you end up with a sort of filtering effect. The people that stay in the rural parts of the country, they become reactionary because they're threatened economically. They perceive they're threatened culturally.
They have a harder time to adapt. They often have a harder time or interest in adapting. That's right. Very good point what you're saying about the filtering out of, go ahead, the kind of, some people would call it a brain drain. I don't mean to be too condescending, but it is an actual cultural thing that happens in this country and other societies as well.
It's a competitive drain. It's the most competitive people, the people who have the most gumption, get up and go. Some percentage of them leave. Not all of them do, but some of them, some percentage leave. And what's interesting about it is that there's not an argument. There's no ideology to this. It's a famous thing about fascism that people talk about. Robert Paxton is amazing on this topic, where there is no like hard ideology of fascism in the world. There's a German variety that had multiple flavors, by the way. There was the SA and Otto Strasser. He wanted like a left-wing, really socialist version of German fascism. The right-wing version won. There were varieties of fascism in France, in Italy, D'Annunzio versus Mussolini. We sort of hear about the winners of those fights. But fascism is really just reactionary radicalism that just picks political ideas up willy-nilly to kind of fill in the program. But they don't really care. They're not, they just want to win. They just want their cultural ethno-state, and everything else is subordinate to that. And you can see what's happened to the GOP right now. All those ideological things about the GOP that we were told forever were what the GOP was about have all been tossed out of the window as if they meant nothing.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it gets back to the point that you made earlier, which I think is so good and so important. The Republican Party doesn't stand for anything anymore. And as soon as you said that, and I think of this often, is how overnight they changed their mind on the Red Scare, the Russians. For 3 generations, the Republican Party, the conservative movement, was far more concerned about communism and the spread of communism than folks in the left were, which were more, if anything, open to that kind of economic system, but not obviously approving of it. Nonetheless, up until the And as recently as the debate I was at in Denver University between Obama and Romney, where the question was asked, the most urgent foreign policy issue, and Romney said Russia. Obama condescendingly laughed at him, and it's a very important moment. And now, where are the Republicans on Russia? They are working with them and looking past anything that they do anywhere in the world. And I would argue it has to do with white supremacy to some extent, and the LGBT attitudes that are prominent and popular in Russia and American conservative right.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually either one of those things.
How dare you?
Or I shouldn't say, I don't think it's the second thing. I think that
I don't think it's a driving force, but I think there's a connection to, you guys hate gay people too? We do too.
Yeah, see,
it's not masculine. Like that.
I really think what it is, the affinity to me, my perception of it, is that what they see in Russia is that there's a leader there who has an affinity for their beliefs, their reactionary beliefs, right? Who doesn't depend on democratic elections to stay in power. And as you saw in this last election, they flipped out and were totally willing to throw away our democracy if their guy couldn't win. I think what they're looking for is somebody who can just come in and make it okay for them.
Yeah,
democracy and everything else.
Yeah, they don't even know. But you're giving them too much credit. I think you're giving the mainstream Trump movement too much credit in terms of understanding democracy versus autocracy, or even capitalism versus communism, or any of these simple, but more.
That's the opposite of what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I'm saying is their emotional reaction is, this is a tough guy who will tell all these other people, in quotes, who believe these other things that I don't like, where they get off, and he can, somebody like that could just run our country and everything would be great. And the whole point is they don't have to think about democracy. They don't have to think about communism. They don't have to think about the implications of, letting people come here as babies and then throwing them out into places they've never been. They don't want to think. They really don't. And they don't want to take any responsibility for anything either. I mean, the classic is that they're claiming, Antifa people were really the ones who attacked Congress. That is so clearly nuts, and it's so clearly wrong. But it tells you where they are in their emotional state. They are unable, and they're really kind of fragile in this respect.
For sure, they're fragile.
Unable to have to come to terms with where their worldview is completely ridiculous. And that's what we have to deal with. I will tell you, I actually had a little bit of communication with Ruth Ben-Ghiat about you're going to want to kill me for bringing this up, but for the February 6, 1934 French attack on their parliament by right-wingers in Paris.
Well, that's how you got her attention. I mean, she's going to answer that.
Yeah, well, so
entreaty.
That attack, though, exactly. This is anyone listening to this just immediately will fall asleep. But but the point is that to make it very brief is that they had a very similar situation to where we are now. But what they also had, that we also have, is the foundation of our civic culture is a liberal one. It's about, we're not an old kingdom that started and then became an empire and then became a democracy, right? We destroyed a kingdom to become a democracy, and that's our foundational myth. Voting's a foundational myth. Guys who read Greek and Roman philosophers and guys like George Washington, who like Cincinnatus went home after power before he had to. That's our foundational myth. France has a similar thing with the French Revolution. And I think in countries like that, where the state still works, the French state in the 1930s was working just fine, even though their politics had incredible gridlock and they couldn't get anything done. And there was intense. So this is the post Dreyfus affair for France, where there was tons of anti-Semitism. But because the state really worked and because there was enough glue to keep things from flying apart or falling apart, what happened after February 6, 1934 is a thing called the Popular Front. And all the left-wing and center-left parties got together and they said, fuck it, we're not going to fight anymore. We're going to be big enough that we can control the government in this country and, in elections, that we can win elections together and form governments just so that the fascists can't take over. And it worked. It worked all the way up until 1940 when they got invaded by the Germans. And there's nobody big enough to do that to us. And I think that we are looking at a situation where in 2022, our progressives going to be able to come out and go, or in 2024, be able to come out and say, you know what, Ralph Nader's kid is running, and I really like the cut of his left-wing jib. Screw these Democrats. What can it hurt? We're going to vote for them. We're not going to vote for them. We're going to vote for, for Marianne Williamson. That's not going to happen. It's going to happen a lot less because the stakes are just too high. They're just too high. And it's so obvious what the stakes are. And so I think that, there is hope in our situation because there just isn't, the state and the civic culture has enough oomph that things have held together. And I don't, I think that there was a chance that there were hostages and murders and everything else on Capitol Hill on January 6th, but there was literally a 0% chance of the Pentagon coming out with troops to support what Trump was doing.
Right.
There was a 0% chance of that. There was a 0% chance of the Washington, D.C. Police Department helping them. In fact, both of those institutions went the other way. And
right.
Have you read this letter that people are going, oh, the smoking gun? It's the Pentagon letter that says D.C. National Guard cannot have ammunition. They cannot. No,
I'm not people. Even familiar with what you're talking about.
Oh, it's this hilarious letter that everyone who hates Trump, rightfully so, has been kicking around on Twitter. And it's a letter from the Pentagon to D.C. and it says National Guard is very strictly limited. They can only do X, Y, and Z. Well, everyone's saying that's obviously evidence that the Pentagon wanted Trump to succeed. It's actually the opposite of that. And this was a letter written by guys like Kash Patel. The D.C. mayor said, because of what happened in Lafayette Park, we do not want the National Guard hovering with helicopters, walking around with guns, being unlabeled, etc. And the Pentagon said, you know what, you're right. We're going to write this memo so that there's a really strict control of any National Guard units in Washington so that you don't get a repeat of what happened over the summer. So while there's a lot of things about what happened on January 6th out there that are really scary and really bad, it's pretty clear that some really hard guardrails stayed in place and didn't move. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that we're more likely to have a situation where people in the center and the left stick together because the reactionary right is so obviously dangerous in power that we're going to do better than we think we're going to do. And I think that Georgia, we should not have won Georgia in this cycle for those two senators.
Well, I think that's the other, you're talking about law enforcement and military, and I would just suggest these Republican secretaries of state and governors and others upheld the results of the election, even though they lost. They didn't. A lot
of federal society judges took a look at what Trump's lawyers put in front of them and heard what there was somebody sent me a thing, which I don't have in front of me, but basically Rudy Giuliani said, well, we're seeing this and we're seeing that. And the judge said to him, my understanding is that you were averring that there was fraud here, and gives him this very long look. And Giuliani kind of looks worried and says, no, I'm not saying that. In other words, these judges were quite ready to hold these guys in contempt of court if they tried to say something they couldn't prove. And so I'll tell you, I'm not a fan of the Federalist Society, but not a single Federalist Society judge helped Trump in any way. Not even, in fact, they went well
on the issue of the election outcome.
On the issue of this election.
Yes.
And that's again, I'm not a fan of the Federalist Society, but it tells you that the guardrail of legal ethics and of the rule of law, Trump didn't have that or believe it, and the people that supported in the executive branch certainly didn't. But all these conservative justices or judges very much did and very much stuck with it. So not bad, right?
Bill B. in D.C. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
All right, there he goes. Bill B. in D.C. on the Twitter. Check him out there. People love when he joins me, which is about every other week or so at this point. Eric Segall joins me almost every week. It would seem sometimes we go a few weeks without talking, but folks loved our conversation last week, and so we tried to build off of that, and he wrote a piece out of that conversation, his latest piece at Dorf on Law, which is what we discussed, having to do with the Confederate flag, Stone Mountain, the South, and American racism. Professor Segall, of course, is a constitutional law professor at Georgia State University. He's the author of two very important radical books, Supreme Myths and Originalism as Faith. He tweets at @eSpinSegall, and you can hear his podcast, Supreme Myths, wherever you get your podcasts. Just look up Eric Segall, Supreme Myths. His guest this week is New York Times Supreme Court correspondent Adam Liptak. We talk a little bit, preview that as well. Here is my friend Eric Segall.
Well, thanks. I have to say that, and several people comment on this. I got a whole bunch of emails about it, too, that were really thoughtful emails. We were talking about kind of Southern culture and heritage and whether that could be disconnected from racism and all that. Anyway, and the whole time I kept saying, is anyone going to care about this conversation? And Pete, shouldn't we talk about something else? And you were like, no, keep going. You were right. I was wrong, and I'm sorry.
Well, I'm happy that you admit that. But the one comment, it's like, it's always the criticism that sticks with me. And I'm fine with that. I don't mind that. I think it's very important that people make the criticisms and that you hear them. And you don't always have to change based on any of it. Yeah. But was that I was, again, interrupting you way too much. So.
Well, I think people, I got, some people wrote that to me as well. But my reaction to that is, occasionally I say, Pete, let me finish. But
yes,
we're having a conversation like two friends. Now, hopefully it's an interesting, fun conversation for others, but we're friends and we interrupt each other, and I interrupt you sometimes, and that's part of it. But our conversation last Sunday led me directly to write a blog post that I timed for today being the first day of Black History Month. So without that podcast last Sunday, I would not have written what I wrote today. And what I wrote for today, I think, is very, I was really, it cleansed me of something I've been meaning to say for a long time. So it was very helpful for me.
And let's get to that. But I think probably just one comment on the interruptions. And you made a great point about we're such good friends that I treat you differently. And it's not that I know more than you about anything. It's just that I feel so comfortable with you because of our friendship that I probably tend to interrupt even more than I would, most people, because I also know that you're not going to allow for it. And, if you don't like it, you're going to tell me. And at the end of our conversation, you said that I needed to be more humble about a certain thing.
Well, I've never said that, but I've never said that to you, for the record.
Never said what?
In other words, I've never thought that I did your old radio show, I don't know how many times, 100, 200, 500, I have no idea. And now these podcasts, I have never, ever hung up or stopped and thought, boy, he should have let me talk more. Not once, not ever.
Well,
and that's not true, by the way, with other interviews that I've done. So, all
right. Well, moving on, enough about our conversation, the way that we communicate, although we did answer. No, it's fine. The piece, your most recent piece that came out of our conversation, which I'm excited by the way, is at dorfonlaw.org, where you often publish your blog entries if they're not at a major newspaper or other media outlet. And it's titled Of Stone Mountain, Confederate Flags and American Racism. Now, we covered some of what this piece covered last week. I have no problem repeating any of it. And I think it's important to mention, because it can't be said enough, that the Confederate flag flies at this park, this state park.
Well, it's not just a park, though, but it's not just a park. See, it's so much more than that. It is the most frequented public, not just park, public facility in the state of Georgia. It is Georgia's number one, like Disneyland, or whatever you want to call it. It's its number one attraction is the word I was looking for, but it didn't have it on the tip of my tongue. It is Georgia's number one attraction by far. 4 million people a year, give or take, come through this park. Its history is sordid. Its symbolism is sordid. Everything about it, except the nature part of it, which is beautiful, because you've been there. I think I took you there, is sordid and racist and terrible, and it needs to change. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but it needs to change.
No, that's fine. Yes, you did take me there. You and your wife Lynn and your two daughters took me to Stone Mountain. It was one of the finer days of my life because A, I got to be with your family, and B, I got to see that really important. No, really, I mean, that was a great day. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm glad we went.
Let me describe it to those. I'm sure a lot of people not from Georgia or the South who don't know. They've heard the phrase Stone Mountain, but don't really know what it is. In 1915, people who wanted to maintain that the Civil War was fought with honor in the South wanted to build a big testament to their cause, believe it or not, which is as heinous, as it comes. And they started working on this etching in this huge mountain. And it wasn't finished, Pete, until 1965. And it's an etching of Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson on their horses. And it's bigger than any person can possibly imagine until you've actually seen it. First of all, my understanding is Stone Mountain is the biggest stone mountain in the world. It goes underground all the way to South Carolina or something. I don't know. But this carving is like the fingernails on Jefferson Davis's hands are like a school bus. I mean, the fingers are. It is so big. Well, you saw it. I mean, it's so big and imposing. They opened it on the 100th anniversary of President Lincoln's assassination. The Ku Klux Klan used Stone Mountain, Georgia, the town, for a long time as a meeting place and as a place to plan their terror. There are two ways to get to the top of the mountain. You can take a gondola, like a ski gondola, and that's kind of fun. And then you see Jefferson Davis and Stonewall Jackson looking down at you, or looking at you. Or you can walk up a different side of the mountain, which I think we did. And at the base of that trail, and this is where many people go because it's a beautiful climb up, there are, as you and I are talking tonight, one American flag that's higher than the rest, and then 4 Confederate flags of different eras of the Confederacy. And so before COVID, my family went again once, and at that time Sarah was 12. My child she stopped me and said, "Dad, look up." And I looked up. Of course, I knew they were there. And she said, "What are they doing here?" And she was very upset about it. And because I think 12-year-olds in Atlanta understand what a heinous symbol this is.
And just to be clear, as a group of Proud Boys that she was pointing to.
On government land and the biggest public attraction in the state of Georgia, there are 4 Confederate flags flying right now as we speak.
Yeah.
And this has to change. And 2 years ago, of course, the Republicans in the Georgia legislature amended a law to make it more difficult to remove monuments and flags and things like that. There are legal, and so the head of the Stone Mountain Commission says he can't take the flags down.
Right.
Now that's a bunch of malarkey. There are all kinds of legal arguments that he can. For example, I don't think anyone put that flag there those flags with the intent to be permanent, whatever permanent means for a flag. I don't know what that means. But we need a law. We need to convince Republicans in Georgia that you have a symbol of the Confederacy on your public land, not in a museum kind of, Holocaust museum kind of way, which is where those flags should go. So my solution for the flags is easy. Put them in a museum in context and explain how heinous.
Yeah, it's not hard. It's not hard. But
it's not.
In this conversation, oh boy, was it fascinating, the emails that I still haven't been able to respond to all of them, that it generated the conversation from folks living in and growing up in the South. But I think the one, good point that I made, well, maybe there were a couple in our last conversation.
There are more than 2.
Well, it was about the view between black Southerners and white Southerners. Right. But the overall conversation here is about the Confederacy and celebrating its history and the leaders and the generals and the flag. I have, Eric, no patience for the conversation.
I know you don't. I know. And you made that clear last week, and I was saying something a little bit different. I was saying last week, and a lot of people reacted to this as, that I was striking a chord with them. There are people, what I said to you last week, and you were kind of skeptical, is... I
would say indignant.
I know Southerners who are not I don't think they are racists, who feel like they lost something positive and valuable after the Civil War.
Do you get to, I'm going to say something here that may offend you.
Doubtful. Very doubtful.
You are a shitty person.
I am not offended. I've been called worse than that by people today.
I was trying to think, like, what's the most offensive thing I could possibly say? No, when you say friends who are not racist, who are you, who am I to decide whether someone is an ignorant, bigoted, racist person? How do we know such things? I tried to, and I'm continue to try to set a threshold for what that might be. But I think the simple test, today's simple test is, it really is. Do you think there should be obstacles for black people to vote? Yes or no? If the answer is no, you have to vote for people and support politicians who want to restore the Voting Rights Act, which, again, I thought about this since we last spoke. You taught me this, period.
So I think what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is to bracket. I'm very interested in having that conversation about what we think racism is, in addition to your one litmus test. All the issues around racism, which I've studied as far as political and cultural. And
I think you're very thoughtful about the issue.
But that doesn't mean that I have any insight into today, But I want to bracket that conversation because based on our conversation last Sunday and the many emails even I got, much less you got, forwarded to me about this. That's the last time I'll keep saying that. But I was just so touched by everybody reaching out. I've decided this issue about Stone Mountain. I'm going to try, there are Georgia groups trying to change it, and I may try to help them, but I've decided a different tact. And you may say, Eric, you're going down the wrong road entirely, which you said to me once before, and I'm going to remind you about that at the end of our talk tonight.
I hate your reminders.
But here's what I think. I think that so the people who think that the Confederate flag stands for something that isn't just pure evil racism. And there are people who think that, Pete. There just are. You can't wish those people away. There are many, many people who would say, I believe in equal opportunity, equal voting, equal everything for African Americans, and the Confederate flag means something to me that is slightly different than just racism and just people wrote that to me. So I know they feel that way. Here's my new thing. However you, white person, feel about the Confederate flag, and you can feel about it however you want, and I'm not suggesting the government can take your Confederate flag outside of, out of your basement or off the side of your house or whatever. That's free speech. You'd right to
the side of your house. But if it is on the side of your house, you should probably think about making some improvements.
Here's my thing. I think it's going to be very difficult to track down African Americans who don't feel this is a symbol of oppression. This is a symbol of racism. This is a symbol of segregation. So it's not a
But if you find one black person who will say that, you will get a contributor deal at Fox News, a contract. Exactly. You will find one or two.
So how about this? Let's respect our fellow citizens and neighbors. And let's say that the Confederate flag never again, never has a place on any governmental property that's not a museum of some kind that, reflects its history. Out of respect to those people who are truly, sincerely offended by this for really good reasons, like their great-grandfather was a slave, or like their father had to live in segregated Georgia, because Georgia was completely segregated. Pools, parks, schools, banks, everything. In my lifetime, we're not talking the freaking Civil War. I know I'm old, but I'm not that old. And when I was, and Georgia was segregated when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, completely. And it's not just schools. People think it was school. No, it was an entire system of apartheid. So this flag is a symbol of that. It's not a coincidence that this monument to the Civil War, to Robert E. Lee, to racism and segregation and slavery was opened in 1965, because it was in 1964 that Congress passed the Civil Rights Bill, in 65 the Voting Rights Act, and people down here were resisting.
Yeah.
And they were resisting in many different ways. And one of the ways they were resisting were these kinds of shrines to the Confederacy. And let's just say that whatever you think about a white person, out of respect to your African-American neighbors, we're not going to let this happen anymore. Now, what's the argument against that? Like, I can't even, they're not going to deny the feelings.
I don't care.
You don't care?
No, because I just don't, it's about compromising with people. And when you're a human, and you care about other human beings, even those that you don't know, much less those that you do. Like when I have an argument with my wife, I'm like, can you give me, this is what I want, and this is why it's important to me. And I know that that's important to you, but could you...
You want me to build a mountain to you? Is that what you want?
What's that?
Want me to build a mountain to you? Is that
I know you well enough that I know you can't build an IKEA bookcase, so I'm not really going to have illusions of grandeur. But the idea that if I can't concede to, the vast majority of people of color who today see it as a terrorist symbol, period.
I agree.
I don't know. And by the way, to be clear to everybody, I don't really have a lot of thoughts about heritage. I do care a ton about history and marking and learning about history so that we don't repeat it. But in my town, there was an argument about the elementary school as to whether or not they should keep it or basically raise it. And the people were screaming, my memories are there. I grew up there. I want my kids to go there. And I was screaming, call the ambulance, fucking knock it down and make it a garden. Make it more important. You can't, I don't care about heritage or your memories. We have to do what's best for the community, what's best for people, and what's best.
You are a communist. Well, you are a communist.
Well, whether or not, no, I'm not. I don't know what I am. This is my specific feeling on heritage. If your heritage is my nightmare, maybe you should reconsider your heritage.
Well, but Pete,
that's not especially sensitive.
So let me get right.
I'm not that thoughtful. It's just like, you're saying that this dish I make makes you think everybody's going to kill you. Right. I won't make that dish anymore.
But my young friend, you are forgetting something. And you're forgetting something really important.
Was that condescending?
A little bit. But I am much older than you, so I get to say that. You could be my son. You ever thought about that?
I think I
am. Politics is, in fact, and you're not going to like this, the art of the possible. That's a line from Evita. And so let's say, hypothetically, that my goal is to help a bunch of people get rid of these Confederate flags at Stone Mountain and do something about Stone Mountain itself, because it's the biggest Confederate symbol in the world. And it's not far from where Martin Luther King, had his church. So, I mean, it's horrific. So we have to do something. But it also may turn out to be the case that Republicans in the Georgia legislature will not be persuaded by any argument that calls the Confederate flag racist or that suggests this is a testament to slavery, segregation, and everything that's horrible about the Civil War. That really could be true, which is really sad. That's the conversation for a different podcast. For this podcast, maybe I could reach, not me, but the people who are fighting this can reach some of these Republicans. I'd like to think this is true. Not by appealing to history or heritage like you're just saying, but by appealing to their Southern neighborly affections. Listen, there are people, millions of African Americans in Georgia who feel that this is you said it perfectly, a symbol of terrorism. Whether you agree or not isn't the point. They sincerely feel that way.
Yeah, you know what else they feel?
Can we help them out, please?
A Jewish space laser is starting the forest fires. How do politics is the art of the possible, but how do I come to a compromise with people who do not believe I should?
I'm not talking about compromising. These flags need to go in a museum, and something needs to happen to the mountain. Now the mountain's complicated, right? I mean, it's a mountain.
Right.
A freaking mountain. So what I said in my blog post today, what others, I mean, this is nothing original with me. You know, I think we're smart enough and technologically advanced enough where we can do something with that carving to indicate that it is there to remind us of the evils of these people.
Can't we just carve a circle and a cross through those 4 Confederate generals just so everybody knows?
Funny. A lot of response to the blog post today was just smash it. Just smash it to smithereens.
No, because that's nature. I don't agree with that. You don't smash it to smithereens, but you could, you could sand their faces off and just, etch in Eddie Murphy, Dave Chappelle.
Well, let's start with this. How about we start with this? So you
Chris Rock.
I'm sorry, I was thinking ahead and you said something funny and I missed it. But that is funny. So the gondola, the only way to get, so you see it best by going up on this gondola.
Yeah.
There's also this horrific laser show that I didn't mention in the blog post that apparently on July 4th is really racist. But leaving that aside.
Wait, there's a racist laser show?
That's what I was told today.
What?
And only on July 4th. There's a lazer show all the time.
How can a laser? What do they do? It's just a burning cross in the sky.
Well, when I tell you, I'm afraid to talk about this. But
okay.
I haven't seen it, and I was told it by
racist
email. But
laser show.
Basically, these Confederate generals come to life, which is the last thing.
Oh my God!
Do you want to see Robert E. Lee?
Oh my God!
And by the way, I should have mentioned.
I Googled racist laser show and it came up. Top hit review of Stone Mountain Park laser spectacular.
If it wasn't so sad, it'd be really funny.
Wow.
I know it's really sad. By the way, in my blog post, I mentioned that, and this can be changed tomorrow. Like, why isn't this being changed tomorrow? Do you know what roads you have to drive on to get to this Jefferson Davis Street, Robert E. Lee Boulevard, Stonewall Jackson.
Enough.
Right, exactly. Exactly. It's just beyond horrific.
Rename them and name them black people and let those folks who are offended be offended. Just enough. I have such a hard time.
Agree, but you have to realize. That's why I wrote the post. I mean, by the way, there's been a lot written about this. In fact, when I researched my piece today, in 2018, there were pieces in the Times and the Daily. All these places were talking about it, and guess what? Like nothing happened.
Right.
So I think.
Well, your piece is going to restart the conversation, I hope.
Well, I hope so. I received a email today from a law professor at Northwestern Law School, which is a very elite law school. From a law professor, I know he's actually a pretty famous guy. I've never met him in person ever because he doesn't teach con law, and he said that he was in Atlanta for a few years, a while back with his family, and he took them to Stone Mountain, and he could not believe the horrors of it. And he wrote me to thank me for writing this. And, I love getting those kind of emails from law professors I've never heard of. I mean, I've never met.
That's great.
I've never, And so I'd like it. I definitely want to rekindle this conversation. I don't think we're ever going to get most Republicans in Georgia to concede what the Confederate flag stands for. I just don't think it's going to happen, Pete. Not in the next few years.
Well, I'm happy to put them on the record with them trying to tread water, explaining what they think it means to them. I say, it means macaroni and cheese done a certain way, my friend. It is about the cuisine and the music and the culture.
Pete, you got some emails from people who said that.
Yeah, all of them were unconvincing. This is the thing that I kept.
But they were honest.
Sure. Oh my gosh, they were lovely. They were lovely. I mean, one guy, Bobby, shared a lot of his childhood.
Okay, so you disagreed with me last week too, but
no, because I know rural poor people. I come from rural poor people.
You don't know rural poor people in the South.
Yeah, what's the difference? All of the good things about Southern culture, all of them, there are separate but very similar and equivalent versions in every rural community in America. I'm sorry, you're not special.
What I was trying to explain to you last week. Maybe it's a biological, I don't mean this literally, so I hope no one out there, I'm not stupid, I'm not meaning this literally, but maybe there is a genetic biological, but Pete, no one in upstate New York had their city burned by invading troops. You have to understand, so I don't think you give enough credit to this point, or at least enough weight to this point. Your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, your great-grandmother, and your great-great-grandmother all live in rural South Carolina or Atlanta or Alabama or Mississippi. And there was a war that destroyed most of your culture and most of your
What
land.
do you think my Lebanese grandfather that came here from Christian persecution in Lebanon, the Irish came here, and my mom's side,
like people...
people overcome, they have their adversity is a legacy of generations in different ways. I don't know what it is supposed to mean. I don't know what it means. It makes today's generation of white Southerners. They are so watered down. There's whatever culture.
Let me explain why I raised this with you 2 years ago in Georgia when you were here, and a couple times since, and last Sunday, and again. The first thing I think we have to do to solve a problem is to understand it. Okay? If you don't understand it, you can't solve it, other than through nuclear bombs or something. So what I've been trying to express to you in various formats over the last years, and other people, is I don't understand. I'm not from this region. Although I've been here 30 years, I don't understand the warmth and feelings of heritage that white Southerners have that are separate from their unique slavery segregation tradition.
There is no there is no separation.
I think you're wrong.
Well, here's what we need to understand.
In real
the
life,
idea you're saying that we need to
understand it first.
Yeah, you're doing what the New York Times is criticized as doing. I think that white people need to start to just begin to think about understanding black people.
Well, of course,
you're saying that we need to understand white Southerners, and I'm telling you right now, I do. I understand them.
Don't.
Yes, I do.
No, you don't.
Yes, and they are no different than the people. They are very, very similar to rural folks around the country.
Let me give you to rural folks.
Yes, it's it's rural cultures and communities. It's not so specific to Southern, and with your legacy of somehow of burning down their city, they know nothing of this. This generation of Americans.
Let me tell you why.
But black people know everything of current day, everyday terrorism. Like the things that you're saying white people today we need to understand, they don't even understand. It's generations ago what you're talking about. What white people understand is what black people are dealing with now, today.
It's also, but no, so I'm not sure. This is a half-baked idea. But all I can tell you is what I said last Sunday, which is, without excusing in any way, shape, or form, and you know I don't, the racism that is inherent, for example, in somebody saying, it's just a flag, what's the big, I don't excuse that, I think it's wrong. I'm not excusing it. What I'm trying to understand is the need, and I think it's a human need, of people to be proud of where they came from and their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. Even if what their great-grandparents did was heinous and just couldn't be
it's funny. What's funny is that I feel like I have a lot of empathy in general. I don't have a lot of empathy for heritage. I don't. And maybe that's because I'm third or fourth generation, and maybe because I don't have a lot. No, I understand. My wife has a lot of that, being first generation, Italian. And I do understand that, but it's generally speaking, it's a sense of certain cultural things that have to do with art, music, diet, food. But like other than that, I don't really, and I appreciate that. And I want to know about that, but.
Let me make one more point about this, and then let's change subjects really quick because I think we're running out of time.
Yes, we're out of time. I want to ask you about your next episode of your podcast.
I can't wait to tell you about this, but I think it's important to be able to identify with. I don't know what's happening, Pete. I'm so sorry. I hope you can. Weird things are happening.
Your phone is ringing?
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I can't stop it. I don't know how to stop it.
You don't know how to make your phone stop ringing?
Well, I turned the ringer off, but it's still ringing.
Do you know how to press decline when you see the phone call coming up?
But I didn't want to do that when I was talking to you because that would be hard, and I can't do all
that. Would have been hard for you to press the red button while you're speaking.
Yes, because I'm talking to you.
I did it 4 times during this conversation. You know how many calls came in? No, I actually turn my phone off when I'm talking to another person. Right. But go ahead.
Let's agree to return to this.
Okay.
To all of these.
Yeah, let's continue.
But I want to make one point.
Go ahead.
The reason I wrote this post today, I want to be 100% clear on this so nothing is misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
It is unconscionable, it is evil, and it is wrong that these Confederate flags are flying where they're flying and that this mountain exists in the form in which it exists. It has to be changed, and I'm going to fight hard to try to change it. And I want to make that
And I know that you will, and that's why I appreciate the peace and the conversation. So now that you've made that point, before we go, I wanted to ask you, your next episode of your podcast, Supreme Myths, you interview probably the most prominent and respected, or you have a conversation with the most prominent, respected Supreme Court reporter, arguably one of a few. Adam Liptak of the New York Times covers the court. He knows you and has referenced your work throughout his career. So this is pretty exciting for your podcast, and I'm looking forward to listening to it myself. But what happened?
So I'm kind of going to give away I'm going to use your podcast to give away. He said a lot of interesting things because he's a really smart guy and he knows a lot about the court. But I want to take you back in time a little bit. Can we go to Time Machine?
Yeah, okay. I'll put a sound effect in.
Thank you. We're going to June of 2018. I'm sorry, June of 2016. Justice Scalia dies in February of 2016.
I remember we had a party.
And now you asked me, never mind. And I was coming on your show to discuss the Supreme Court in general and blah, blah, blah. And we had a pre-show talk. And I said, I have this idea that has now been in the Daily Beast, I think at that point, and maybe up in a Post. It eventually ended up in the New York Times and various other places. I had this wild and crazy idea, but I'm right, that we should freeze the Supreme Court. Because when Justice Scalia died, there were 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats on the court. 8. The original number was 6 in 1788. So I said, let's freeze it at 8. Let's always have 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats. So it's always equally divided. So the court will be more humble, do less work, and have to reach consensus better. And then I had a statutory fix for if an independent came around that everybody thought was the cat's meow, I had a way of getting an independent on the court so people wouldn't be so upset about that. And you wouldn't let me talk about the fucking idea on your show because you said it would never happen. And then, which you were right about that part of it, not letting me talk about it. Then the next day, I actually talked to Adam Liptak about it because I was going to do a presentation of this topic at the University of Chicago in front of all kinds of famous judges and people, including the judge I won't name because I always name him on your show. And Adam was very honest with me. He said, Eric, I'm ambivalent about the even number judges. We did have that originally at 6, but this idea of an equally divided court is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And if you say that in Chicago, you're going to be in for a very rough time because he knew he had done that. He had done the same presentation, same workshop I was doing. And it really is among the most intellectually it's just a very tough audience. And he said, Eric, be prepared. And he was right about that. I got stared at by various judges like I was a monster. Adam said to me today on this podcast that he has come around to my point of view.
Wow.
That he thinks an evenly divided Supreme Court among Republicans and Democrats, with hopefully some kind of independent, option if it comes up, is actually a pretty good idea. I could not.
When that happened on your podcast,
this was a cause célèbre for me, Pete, for a long time.
And it's kind of radical.
I still think I'm right about this. 4 years later. Anyway, this was very nice. And Adam smiled. Now, I actually stopped. So I didn't want him to I didn't know if he was throwing me a bone, kind of in a way, because he knows this is my idea and I'm associated with that idea. So I really stopped it kind of and paused and said, Adam, do you really believe this? And he said, yeah, I do. So I may go back to the drawing board on that idea.
Well, when that happened on your podcast, Supreme Myths, when he acknowledged that your idea was a legitimate idea, can you describe what happened in your body?
You know, it's interesting.
When you are redeemed, when your long-held belief is supported by someone in kind of the mainstream Supreme Court. I mean, you must have
once
felt
thought it was stupid. Who once thought it was a stupid?
Yeah, exactly.
He didn't mince words. I wouldn't want Adam to ever mince words.
The word I'm looking for is vindication.
Yes, it was more than that, Pete, because
it was orgasmic.
This is going to get kind of personal, but you know, I am extraordinarily happy with my career. I've been very lucky, and in 2000, on your show, when I said to Dahlia Lithwick in 2012 that Justice Kagan had to recuse herself from the Affordable Care Act case, and Dahlia Lithwick said that's ridiculous, and I explained why, and she said that's still ridiculous, and then we hung up, and then she sent me an email and said write this up for Slate. That was my first piece ever in a place like Slate or Daily Beast or Salon or whatever. That changed my career forever. And so you, and I told you before, your audience knows, you've been a big part of my career success, which I'm very proud of. And I'm proud of it both as an academic and as kind of a media type, you know, sometimes person. But teaching at Georgia State, which is I love my law school and I'm very proud of it. You know, it's not teaching at Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Chicago, Columbia. It's just not. And it's one thing to have crazy ideas at Columbia, but it's another thing to have crazy ideas at Georgia State. And a lot of people thought I was crazy, although most non-lawyer smart people thought I was right. But law professors thought I was crazy. Evenly divided Supreme Court. Are you out of your mind? Blah, 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 blah. When Adam then 4 years later says, you know, actually I thought about it and it was actually a pretty good idea. When someone like Adam Liptak does that, even though it shouldn't mean that much to me, it does. It just does.
Well, that's great. I'm looking forward to hearing that, and I'm so glad to hear you say all that. And it is, of course, an interesting theory, and it's an interesting future that we're going to be seeing.
It'll never happen, but
that was always my point, is that I just didn't think it would happen. But I'd be so happy if it didn't happen. And more importantly, the idea that I get any respect or credence on my thoughts, Supreme Court versus someone who has been studying it and living it in his entire life is preposterous. So, you know, anybody hearing the conversation should know I'm just a jackass in my shed.
No. Actually, at the
you're
time,
teaching constitutional law and have been for 1,000 years. Actually, literally 1,000 years. I remember when your first course was on a wall in a cave.
I was there in the Civil War, and
you fought. That's right. That's right. You're on the right side.
That's how old I am. Thank you, my friend.
People would think you'd give more credibility based on that. Eric Segall, listen to the podcast, Supreme Myths. Follow him on Twitter at @eSpinSegall. Thank you, my friend. Always great.
My pleasure. Let's continue this conversation about race.
I can't wait to hear about what people think about it. So email me, and I'll, as always, send them along to you. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pete.
There he goes, Professor Eric Segall at eSpinSegall. Check out his podcast, Supreme Myths. Listen to his latest interview with Adam Liptak, which should be dropping in a day or two. Definitely check that out and subscribe to it. And if you can help him figure out how to work his phone or other mechanical devices, that would be helpful to all humanity. Love Eric Segall and Bill Boyle in Washington, D.C., two of your favorite regulars joining me. I'm scheduled to talk with Ali Soufan on Tuesday, as well as today, and then Dr. Aaron Carroll. Lots of great guests coming up. Hope to see you guys Thursday night at 8 Eastern. If you're a subscriber, if you're not, sign up now and join us. Join us anytime on the Discord platform as well, where you can always text and chat, voice and video over there. Love that platform and love building and being a part of this community with you and learning and growing with you each and every day. John Carroll wrote the music and lyrics for the theme song. And John, take it away, will you?
When the tyrants taunt you and the sirens tease, you better stand up. Stand up. Let the brave meet the challenge, let the weak flee. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creep knees. You gotta stand up, stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. We got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up, that's right. We got to rise up, you got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, 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 come on. Stand up.
And now comedian and super awesome ranter, Corey Forrester.
My name is Corey Ryan Forrester. I'm from Marjorie Green Taylor's district here in Walker County, Georgia. And I think it's important that people hear what I have to say. I'm going to try not to scream. I'm going to try not to yell. I'm going to try not to say things like, Marjorie Green Taylor's the biggest fucking piece of shit I've ever seen. I'm going to try really hard. Because again, I don't want this to fall on deaf ears. But we're not all like that. And I don't want to sound like a not all white people thing, because we definitely need to take accountability. We definitely have earned a lot of it. But I'm so fucking sick and tired of having to constantly defend my accent. And I'm not asking everyone out there to stop thinking of my people of a certain way. I'm talking to my people right now. Vote this fucking bitch out! God! Aren't you ashamed? How are you not ashamed? It's one thing to like guns. It's a completely other thing to be fine with someone who harasses school shooting victims and talks about how it's fake. This is so asinine. QAnon has become synonymous with Walker County, Georgia, and I'm fucking tired of it. I've grown up here my whole life, and I was led to believe that there are decent people, and I still believe that. But until I start seeing a majority scream at this lady and talk about how she doesn't represent us, I don't believe it. And I'm so tired of it, man. I know I'm not the only one. I'm so fucking sick of people in the comment section saying, oh, you're a good one. You're one of the good ones, Corey. Do you know how fucking embarrassing that is? I'm talking to those of you who feel the same way as me but aren't saying anything because you don't want to upset your mom and dad, you don't want to upset your papaw, you don't want to upset your friends, maybe you don't want to get fired from your job. Now it's time to use that fucking white privilege, baby. We've got it in spades. I'll say whatever the fuck I want. Fuck her, fuck QAnon, fuck the radical right, fuck all them. Well, I'm in a goddamn blue state now, and it's time we started fucking acting like it. Fuck her. It ain't all of us, god damn it.